When did the kids have to be the adults? I was on the school bus when the emergency alert blasted through everyone's phones. Flash flood warning. Seek higher ground immediately. Avoid all low water crossings. I yelled from the front seat, "Mr. Brown, there's a flood," but Brown just pressed harder on the gas. I've driven this route for 15 years. Little water never hurt anyone. The rain was coming down so hard we could barely see through the windows. Jason tried showing him his phone with the emergency alert. "Sir, it says all vehicles should—" Brown snatched the phone and shoved it in his pocket. "No phones on my bus. You know the rules." The water was racing across the road now, brown and churning with branches and debris. My hands were already shaking as we headed straight for it. The bus hit the water and immediately jerked sideways. Younger kids in the back started screaming as muddy water rose up to the door seals. Brown yanked the wheel hard, and the bus violently swung from side to side. "See? I got this under control." A silver flash slid out from under his seat during the violent turn. His words were slightly slurred. "Just need to gun it through this little puddle." My heart was hammering so hard I could even hear it over the rain. The water kept rising on the road, getting thicker with debris. Then the engine sputtered and died right in the middle of the flood. Brown kept grinding the ignition over and over. "Stupid new buses. Piece of junk." He turned to face us while we begged to be let out. "Shut your mouths before I write up every last one of you." That's when I smelled it. Beer. My stomach dropped as I connected the dots. We were trapped in a flood with a drunk driver. Before I could react, he turned back around and got the ignition going. When he wasn't looking, I speed texted into our group chat. "I think Brown is drunk." Other kids were starting to notice too. His bloodshot eyes, the way he kept missing the radio buttons, his shaking hands. A second grader piped up innocently, "Why does it smell like my dad's beer?" Jason, the class clown, went completely white. "Yo, is Mr. D actually wasted right now?" Sally insisted. "We should report this properly when we get to school." Bradley stood up. "We need to get off this bus now." Brown whipped around, stumbling slightly. "You think you're in charge, tough guy? I've been driving since before your parents were born." Water was hitting the windows now. My whole body was trembling. I bolted for the emergency exit and pulled hard. Nothing. It had been disabled last week after kids kept setting it off as pranks. Panic clawed at my throat. "It's locked!" I screamed. More kids rushed to help me pull. We were all yanking on it together. We were on a rural route in heavy rain with no cell signal and no houses for miles. Brown suddenly swerved at an oncoming car for no reason. "That'll teach them to use my lane." A kindergartner wet his pants and started sobbing uncontrollably. "Sit down, or you'll never ride this bus again. I know where you all live," Brown screamed. He was doing 50 in a 25-mile-per-hour school zone now, weaving between lanes. We approached a busy intersection with a red light, but he wasn't slowing down. Then I saw her, a woman holding a toddler, standing on her car roof. My blood went ice cold. "Stop! You're going to hit them!" The whole bus screamed in unison. "Maybe they should have thought about that before being in my way." There was no more time to think about the rules. I sprinted to the front and grabbed the red emergency brake lever, pulling with everything I had. My hands were slippery with sweat, but I didn't let go. The bus skidded violently and kids went flying. Water was pouring in through the door seals now. We pried windows open while bigger kids boosted smaller ones out first. The entire bus worked like a machine, older kids forming human ladders, passing the little ones up and out. Rescue boats reached us just as the bus wedged against the concrete bridge supports. Brown was still screaming about disrespect while being pulled from the water. His breathalyzer showed 0.19 BAC, over twice the legal limit. Security footage from the bus revealed he'd been sipping from that flask throughout his entire shift. Turns out he'd been written up 3 times for seeming tired, but the principal had ignored every complaint to avoid dealing with the driver shortage. The fire chief told reporters that if we'd stayed on that bus 30 seconds longer, it would have been a mass casualty event. He was fired and banned from ever working at our school again, and 2 weeks later, he was hired by a public school 5 miles away. So that wasn't justice. Not after what he'd almost stolen from us that day. We all knew what had to happen next. Jason texted everyone from the bus to meet at his garage after dinner. I biked over around 7 and found most kids already there, sitting on paint cans and old lawn chairs. Sally was picking at her fingernails while Bradley paced back and forth near the workbench. The younger kids, who'd been in the back of the bus, huddled together on an old couch, still jumpy whenever someone moved too fast. Jason's mom brought out a plate of cookies, but nobody touched them. We all kept checking our phones, reading the same news article about Brown getting hired 5 miles away. My hands wouldn't stop shaking no matter how hard I pressed them against my jeans. The garage door creaked open, and this older guy walked in, maybe 50, wearing a faded work shirt. Jason's dad introduced him as Harvey Garza, said his son Tyler died in a school bus crash 3 years back. Harvey looked at each of us, really looked, like he could see what we'd been through. He pulled up a folding chair and sat down heavy, rubbing his face before he spoke. "Brown starts driving for Oakdale District on Monday," he said. The room went dead quiet. Harvey pulled out this thick manila folder stuffed with papers and forms. "But new drivers have a 2-week probation period before their contract locks in." He spread the papers across the workbench, pointing at different sections with a pen. "We got 14 days to stop him, and I know exactly how to do it." My hands finally stopped shaking as I grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything he said. Harvey showed us the complaint forms for the State Transportation Board, the contact info for the safety inspector, the exact wording we'd need. He'd been fighting for bus safety since Tyler died, knew every loophole and every person who could help. Bradley's dad showed up with his laptop and started typing up a timeline of everything that happened on our bus. Sally's mom brought her phone with all the parent group chats from both schools. More parents kept arriving until the garage was packed, everyone listening to Harvey explain the process. He said we needed documentation, witnesses, and media pressure all hitting at once. The energy in that garage shifted from scared kids to people with a plan. plan. My phone buzzed all night with texts from other kids wanting to help. The next morning, my notifications exploded with messages from Oakdale students. This girl, Madison, said Brown had already yelled at her brother for dropping his backpack in the aisle. Her mom noticed Brown's hands shaking when he grabbed the wheel. Another kid said Brown seemed confused about the route, kept missing stops. We set up a shared Google Doc, and kids started adding their observations, even tiny things they noticed. By noon, we had 23 different concerns logged from just his first practice run. I forwarded everything to Harvey, who immediately started filing state complaints. Mom had to drive me to the school now because I couldn't get on any bus without my chest getting tight. While she drove, I searched transportation laws on my phone, scrolling through pages of regulations. There it was in Section 47B, mandatory random drug and alcohol testing for all commercial drivers. Our district hadn't done a single random test in 2 years, according to their own reports. I screenshot everything and sent it to Harvey. He called me right back, said this was huge, that he was filing an immediate complaint with the State Oversight Board. 3 parents from Oakdale reached out through Facebook after someone shared our story in their PTA group. They wanted an emergency meeting and asked if we'd come tell them what happened. My stomach twisted at the thought of talking in front of strangers about that day. Jason saw my face and said he'd go with me, that we'd do it together. His mom offered to drive us both to the meeting that Thursday night. The principal finally started returning calls after parents bombarded the school switchboard, but he just kept repeating the same line about personnel matters being confidential. He wouldn't confirm if Brown had been written up, wouldn't explain why the emergency exits were disabled, wouldn't take any responsibility. Bradley's dad was a lawyer, and he sent this formal records request demanding all of Brown's employment files. The principal had 30 days to legally respond, but we only had 11 days left before Brown's probation ended. That Thursday, at the PTA meeting, the Oakdale cafeteria was packed with worried parents. I stood up at the microphone, and my voice cracked on the first word. I told them about the water rising, about pulling that emergency brake, about Brown's flask sliding across the floor. A mom in the back row started crying when I described the disabled exit. The room erupted with parents shouting questions at the school board members who'd shown up. They demanded Brown be removed immediately, demanded to know how he passed their background check. The board members kept saying they'd look into it, but parents weren't having it. One dad stood up and said his kid wouldn't ride any bus until Brown was gone. More parents nodded and said the same thing. Friday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Tristan Mendez from Channel 7 News, said someone forwarded him our group chat screenshots. I wonder what Harvey Garza's real story is. A dad who lost his son in a bus crash 3 years ago just happens to know exactly how to work the system. He'd been investigating bus driver shortages for months and wanted to know about the complaints against Brown. I told him I'd talk if he kept us anonymous for now. Didn't want Brown coming after us. He agreed, and we talked for an hour about everything that happened. He said he had sources at both districts who were worried about speaking up. That weekend, Harvey called with big news. He'd been digging through state records and found that Brown's commercial license should have been automatically suspended after a DUI arrest 2 years ago. Somehow, the suspension never went through the system. Harvey filed this bombshell with Rick Hogan at the State Transportation Department. Rick promised to investigate within 48 hours, said if this was true, Brown would be pulled immediately. Monday morning, our counselor asked to see me during first period. She said I was showing signs of PTSD, that she'd noticed me jumping at the fire alarm, the dark circles under my eyes. She wanted me to see a trauma specialist, but I told her I couldn't stop now. We only had 8 days left to save those Oakdale kids. She made me promise to get help after Brown was dealt with, said trauma doesn't just go away on its own. Tuesday afternoon, Annabelle Kerr from the new district called an emergency meeting with all the concerned parents who'd been calling. The community center was packed with over 200 people when Harvey and I walked in wearing our red shirts. Kerr stood at the podium shuffling papers and clearing her throat every few seconds. She started talking about driver shortages and budget constraints and how Brown had passed their standard background check. Harvey stood up from his seat in the third row and pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. He read the fire chief's exact words about the mass casualty event in this loud, clear voice that made everyone go silent. Kerr's face went from pink to white as he kept reading about Brown's blood alcohol level and the disabled emergency exits. Parents started shouting questions and demanding answers, while Kerr kept saying she'd look into it. That night, the rain started again, and I was brushing my teeth when the sound of water hitting the roof made my chest get tight. My hands started shaking and I dropped the toothbrush in the sink. The room started spinning and I couldn't catch my breath no matter how hard I tried. Mom found me on the bathroom floor gasping and crying and thinking I was drowning, even though I was completely dry. She called Jason, and he came over in his pajamas and sat with me on the bathroom floor for 2 hours. He kept reminding me we were safe and listing all the things we were doing to protect other kids. Wednesday morning at 6 a.m., Tristan's article went live on the news website with this huge headline about the drunk driver being hired despite his recent firing. My phone started buzzing with notifications as everyone shared it on Facebook and Twitter. By lunchtime, the new school's phones were ringing non-stop with angry parents demanding explanations. Kerr released this short statement saying Brown was temporarily reassigned to non-driving duties pending further review. Thursday morning, Brown showed up at the new school's transportation office anyway, demanding his regular bus route assignment. The secretary called security when he started pounding on the counter and yelling about his rights. 2 security guards had to physically drag him out while he screamed about persecution and lawsuits and how we'd ruined his life. Someone filmed the whole thing on their phone, and within an hour, it was spreading through every parent WhatsApp group in both districts. Friday afternoon, I was in chemistry class when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Leah Schaefer from the district attorney's office saying they were filing criminal charges against Brown. She listed them off like she was reading a grocery list. DUI, 37 counts of child endangerment and reckless endangerment. She needed all of us to testify, but warned the case could take months or even a year to get to trial. I told her we didn't have months because Brown could hurt someone else before then. She said she understood, but the legal system moved slowly and there was nothing she could do to speed it up. Saturday morning, Harvey sent out a group text saying we needed to pack the next board meeting with as many people as possible. He'd ordered 200 red shirts that said student safety first and arranged for them to be distributed at the local library. Monday night, we had a convoy of 40 cars driving to the district office with parents and kids, all wearing those red shirts. The boardroom only had seats for about 60 people, but we squeezed in over 100 with people standing along the walls. When the board president tried to limit public comment to 3 minutes each, Harvey pulled out a list showing 40 parents had signed up to speak. The board members looked at each other nervously as parent after parent stood up telling stories about their kids being scared to ride the bus. Tuesday morning, a message popped up in my Facebook inbox from someone I didn't know. She said she was a bus driver at Brown's new district and had seen him drinking from a flask in the parking lot last week. She was scared to report it because they were already short 3 drivers and she didn't want to lose her job. I asked if she'd be willing to go on record, and she said yes, if her name could be kept private. I forwarded her message to Tristan with her permission, and he said he'd protect her identity. Wednesday afternoon, Rick Hogan from the State Transportation Department finally called Harvey back about the CDL suspension issue. He'd spent 2 days digging through records and confirmed that Brown's license should have been suspended after his DUI 2 years ago. The paperwork had gotten lost in the system somehow, and nobody had followed up. Rick issued an emergency order right there on the phone, preventing Brown from driving any commercial vehicle pending a full investigation. Harvey put him on speaker so I could hear Kerr in the background saying she had no choice but to officially terminate Brown's employment immediately. Thursday morning, Bradley's dad's records request finally came through, and the documents were worse than we'd imagined. The principal had known about Brown's drinking for at least 6 months, with 3 separate reports from teachers who'd smelled alcohol on him. Every single report was marked with the same note in the principal's handwriting: no action needed due to driver shortage. My whole body got hot reading those words, and I had to walk outside to cool down. The school board called an emergency meeting that afternoon and placed the principal on administrative leave pending an investigation. Friday, some parents started posting on Facebook that we were going too far and ruining people's lives over one mistake. Sally's mom actually called my mom saying we should show Christian forgiveness and move on. Mom's voice got real quiet, which meant she was really mad, and she said forgiveness doesn't mean letting drunk drivers keep driving children. The conversation got heated, and Sally's mom hung up on her. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a Facebook message from an account with no profile picture. The message said I was a snitch who ruined a good man's life and that Brown had 3 kids to feed. I deleted it and tried to forget about it, but then another one came through Instagram saying I'd regret what I did. My hands started shaking as I read it over and over. Then came the one that made my blood run cold because it had my home address and said they knew where I lived. Dad grabbed the phone from my hand and called the police right away. 2 officers came to our house and took screenshots of everything. They traced the IP address to a computer at the public library, but the security footage showed a young guy in a baseball cap using it. One of the officers recognized him as Brown's nephew from a previous arrest. They picked him up that afternoon, and he admitted to sending the messages because his uncle asked him to scare us into dropping everything. The judge issued a restraining order that same day, and the nephew had to stay 500 feet away from me and my family. Monday afternoon, Tristan called saying he had someone who wanted to talk to me. It was the woman from the car roof, the one holding her toddler when Brown almost hit them. She started crying as soon as she saw me and pulled me into this huge hug. She kept saying thank you over and over while her little girl played with blocks on the floor. The woman told me she'd been stuck on that car for 2 hours before we stopped Brown from hitting them. She said she'd already given a statement to the police about how Brown was swerving all over the road. Her testimony would help the case because she was an outside witness who saw everything. When she left, I sat in my room and cried for the first time since the whole thing started. Tuesday morning, Harvey got a call from Brown's union saying they'd filed a formal grievance about his termination. The union rep argued that addiction was a medical condition and Brown deserved treatment instead of punishment. Harvey spent the rest of the day calling every parent from both bus routes to organize them for the grievance hearing. He ordered 100 poster boards and had families make signs with their kids' school photos on them. The hearing was set for Thursday at the district office. We showed up with 60 parents and kids all holding those photo posters. The room was so packed that people had to stand in the hallway. Brown's lawyer stood up first and tried to make us look like mean teenagers who wanted revenge. He said we were exaggerating what happened and that Brown was a victim of his disease. Then Leah Schaefer stood up and asked to play something on the projector. The room went dead silent as the bus security footage started playing. Harvey's detective work uncovered what the state missed for 2 years. Brown's license was basically playing hide and seek in their filing cabinet while he drove kids around drunk. You could see Brown taking sips from his flask while driving, then almost hitting that woman on the car roof. The union representative's face went completely white as he watched Brown swerving between lanes with kids screaming in the background. Before the video even finished, the union rep stood up and withdrew the grievance on the spot. He actually apologized to all of us for not knowing the full story. Friday afternoon, Tristan called with huge news. A mechanic from the bus depot had reached out to him after reading the articles. The mechanic said Brown had asked him 3 weeks before the flood Flood to disconnect the breathalyzer ignition lock on his bus. The mechanic refused and reported it to his supervisor, but nothing was ever done about it. This proved that the district knew Brown had a drinking problem and did nothing to stop him. The mechanic agreed to go on record with his story and had the work order Brown submitted as proof. Harvey immediately forwarded everything to Rick Hogan at the State Transportation Department. By Monday morning, the state announced a full audit of both school districts' transportation departments. Inspectors showed up at the bus depots with clipboards and started going through every single record. They found drivers with expired licenses who were still driving kids every day. They found buses with disabled emergency exits just like ours had been. They found drug tests that were supposed to happen monthly but hadn't been done in over a year. One driver tested positive for marijuana during the surprise screening. Another one had a suspended license from a DUI in another state that nobody had caught. The inspection report was 300 pages long and showed that Brown wasn't the only problem. The whole system was broken and had been putting kids in danger for years. Wednesday, during third period, the fire alarm went off for a drill. I froze completely at my desk while everyone else filed out. My body just wouldn't move, even though I knew it was just a drill. The teacher had to come back and help me walk outside. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stand. The counselor called my parents and said I needed to see someone who specialized in trauma. Mom made an appointment with a therapist for that Friday. The therapist's office had soft chairs and a white noise machine that made ocean sounds. She explained that my brain was stuck in survival mode from almost drowning on the bus. She taught me this thing called grounding, where you name 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. We practiced breathing exercises, and she helped me understand that being super aware of exits and danger wasn't weird, it was my brain trying to protect me. After a few weeks of sessions, I stopped freezing during fire drills. Meanwhile, Leah Schaefer was working on a plea deal with Brown's lawyer. Brown would plead guilty to lesser charges if he completed 90 days of inpatient rehab and gave up his commercial driving license forever. Some kids from the bus wanted him in jail, but Leah explained that this deal guaranteed he could never legally drive kids again. If we went to trial, he might get off completely or get such a light sentence that he'd be back driving within a year. The plea deal was the safest option for future kids. Brown entered rehab the next week at a facility 2 hours away. A month later, Tristan won a statewide journalism award for his investigation into school bus safety. The story had spread to other districts where parents started demanding driver background checks and drug testing. 3 more drunk drivers got caught and removed because of the new attention on the issue. Harvey used the momentum to create a non-profit organization called Safe Seats that would push for transportation safety laws. He got donations from local businesses and even some national safety groups. The new principal at our school didn't waste any time making changes. She ordered monthly drug tests for every single bus driver with no exceptions. She installed cameras that faced the driver's seat to monitor their behavior. Every emergency exit got fixed and tested weekly. She ran evacuation drills once a month where kids practiced getting out of buses quickly and safely. She hired 2 new mechanics whose only job was maintaining safety equipment. She created an anonymous tip line where kids could report concerns about drivers. Everything that should have been in place before Brown almost killed us was finally getting done. 3 weeks later, I was picking out cereal at the grocery store when 2 older people walked up to me and my mom. The woman had Brown's same nose and chin, and the man kept wringing his hands while she talked about how her brother needed support letters for his sentencing hearing next month. She pushed a piece of paper at me with his lawyer's address on it while saying he was a good man who made one mistake. Bradley's mom appeared out of nowhere and stepped right between us, putting her hand on my shoulder and telling them we'd been through enough already. The woman's face got red, and she started saying something about forgiveness, but Bradley's mom just steered me away toward the checkout. My hands shook for the rest of the day, and I kept seeing that woman's face every time I closed my eyes. The sentencing hearing came faster than I expected, and the courthouse was packed with reporters and parents from both districts. I sat in the witness stand reading my victim impact statement, my voice cracking when I described pulling that emergency brake and thinking we were all going to die. Brown sat at the defendant's table with his head down, and when I got to the part about the disabled emergency exit, he actually started crying. His lawyer had him stand up and apologize, saying addiction had destroyed his judgment and he'd do anything to take it back. The judge listened to everything, looked at Brown's rehab completion certificate, then gave him 2 years probation and permanent loss of his commercial driving license. Some parents wanted jail time, but Leah explained afterward that this guaranteed he could never legally drive kids again. The district's insurance company started their lawsuit the next week, claiming they shouldn't have to pay settlements because the district knew about the danger and did nothing. Harvey actually smiled when he got the paperwork because their argument proved the administration's negligence, which would help our case. He spent the next 3 days calling lawyers he knew from Safe Seats, finding pro bono attorneys for every family who wanted to pursue damages. The insurance company didn't realize they'd just handed us evidence on a silver platter. Jason launched his podcast about student safety 2 months after the incident, recording in his bedroom with a cheap microphone his dad got him. His first episode was just him talking about that day on the bus, but by episode 3, he was interviewing other kids who'd survived school transportation accidents from all over the country. NPR's Student Podcast Network picked it up after episode 10, and suddenly, thousands of people were listening to him turn our trauma into something useful. His old humor started coming back, but now it had this edge of purpose, making serious points while keeping people engaged. 4 months after the incident, I finally worked up the courage to ride the bus again. I sat right by the emergency exit with my hand on the seat next to the handle handle, watching everything the new driver did. Miss Reese noticed my white knuckles and quietly told me she'd been sober for 15 years and took student safety personally because her nephew died in a drunk driving accident. She showed me her sobriety chip on her keychain and promised she'd never put us in danger. My shoulders finally relaxed a little bit for the first time since Brown. Harvey called me one afternoon saying the state legislature was considering a bill requiring breathalyzer ignition locks on all school buses. We drove to the state capitol the next week to testify, sitting in those big leather chairs while representatives asked us questions about that day. I explained how Brown's flask fell out during the flood and how the principal were ignored complaints, while Harvey presented data showing drunk driving incidents in the school transportation statewide. The bill passed unanimously 3 weeks later, officially named Brown's Law, and the governor signed it in a ceremony where we got to stand behind him for the photo. It felt like the first real victory that would actually last beyond our situation and protect kids we'd never even meet. The news about our original principal came through the district email saying he was taking early retirement to spend time with family. No mention of his negligence or the investigation or how he'd ignored safety complaints for years. Harvey said it was frustrating, but at least the new administration was making real changes, with the new principal personally reviewing every safety complaint and conducting surprise driver checks. Sometimes you take the wins you can get, even when they don't feel like enough. 6 months after the incident, our whole group was doing better in different ways. Sally joined the student safety committee and started reviewing bus camera footage for concerning behavior. Bradley ran for student council on a platform of accountability and transparency, and Jason's podcast had thousands of regular listeners who sent in their own safety stories. We'd all channeled our trauma into something productive instead of letting it eat us alive. Then Harvey got a call from the police saying Brown had been arrested for public intoxication at a bar downtown. He'd violated his probation terms, and the judge gave him 90 days in county jail. I thought I'd feel satisfied when I heard the news, but mostly I just felt sad about wasted potential and wondered what Brown could have been if he'd gotten help sooner. Brown's family trying to corner a traumatized kid in the cereal aisle for a support letter takes some serious nerve. Nothing says, "My brother deserves mercy," quite like ambushing teenagers near the Lucky Charms while they're still having nightmares about almost drowning. Harvey reminded me that consequences weren't about revenge, but about protecting others from harm. The school's safety fair happened 8 months after the incident, with booths about emergency procedures and transportation safety. I was manning the safe seats table when a woman walked up holding a toddler's hand, the same woman who'd been standing on her car roof during the flood. The little girl was walking now, wearing a pink dress and laughing at everything, completely unaware of how close she'd come to drowning that day. She ran right up and hugged my legs, while her mom whispered thank you with tears streaming down her face. That moment, feeling that little girl's arms around me, made everything we'd been through worth it. Her mom started telling everyone at the fair about what we'd done, and soon a crowd gathered around our booth, parents asking questions about bus safety while their kids played with the emergency exit demonstration model Harvey had built. Annabelle Kerr pushed through the crowd, the same transportation director who'd defended hiring Brown just months ago, and I tensed up expecting another fight. She stood there for a minute watching us explain the safety protocols to parents, then grabbed a clipboard and started taking notes on everything we were saying. After the crowd thinned out, she walked up to our table and set down a thick folder full of new driver screening procedures she'd been working on. She said watching us fight so hard had made her realize she'd been part of the problem, choosing convenience over safety, and now she wanted our input on making the strictest screening program in the state. Harvey looked through her proposals, pointing out gaps while she actually listened and wrote down every suggestion, completely different from the defensive person we'd confronted months earlier. Over the next few weeks, she implemented every single change we'd suggested, requiring psychological evaluations, random drug tests twice a month, and mandatory reporting of any safety concerns with immediate investigation. She even went on the local news to announce the changes, telling reporters that a group of brave students had opened her eyes to what real safety meant. 3 months later, I got a letter from the governor's office saying I'd been selected for the State Youth Advocacy Award, with a ceremony at the Capitol next month. Mom drove me to the Capitol building where they had this huge auditorium set up with hundreds of people, and when they called my name, my legs felt like jelly walking up to that podium. Standing there looking out at all those faces, holding that award, I remembered being frozen with fear on that bus, my hands shaking as I reached for the emergency brake. The scared kid who pulled that brake would never have imagined standing here, speaking to state officials about safety reform, knowing how to fight the system instead of just surviving it. The bus families started meeting every month at different houses, what began as support group meetings turning into something bigger. The parents would sit around discussing new safety initiatives while us kids played video games or did homework together. This weird extended family born from shared trauma. Sally's mom always brought homemade cookies. Bradley's dad reviewed legal documents, and Jason's parents organized carpools to make sure everyone could attend. These weren't just meetings anymore, but family dinners where the little kids who'd been so scared on the bus now laughed and played like normal children again. We'd gone from strangers thrown together by disaster to people who genuinely cared about each other's lives beyond just the advocacy work. A year after the incident, the district released their annual safety report showing 0 bus accidents, 0 safety violations, and the highest driver retention rate in the state. The new safety standards had actually attracted better drivers who appreciated working somewhere that took their job seriously, with proper support and regular training. Good drivers were applying from other districts specifically because they wanted to work somewhere with high standards and accountability. One afternoon, Mom handed me a letter that had come to the house with no return address, my name written in shaky handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a 2-page letter from Brown, writing from rehab about how he'd finally admitted he was an alcoholic and was taking responsibility for what he'd done to us. He wrote about the shame he felt remembering that day, how he'd risked our lives because he couldn't admit he needed help, and how he wasn't asking for forgiveness, just wanted us to know he was trying to get better. I sat there holding that letter for a long time, part of me wanting to tear it up, part of me recognizing the courage it took to write it. I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer, not ready to forgive, but not ready to throw it away either. Harvey called me excited about safe seats expanding to 12 states, with parent groups organizing around student transportation safety using our model. He asked if I'd join the Youth Advisory Board, helping other students learn how to advocate for safety in their districts, and of course, I said yes. We designed t-shirts with a photo of that jammed emergency exit from the bus, the one I'd desperately pulled on while water rose around us, with "Never Again" printed below it. Those shirts became our symbol, worn at every school board meeting, every safety demonstration, every protest when districts tried to cut safety funding. Every emergency exit in our district now had bright yellow inspection stickers that 2 different people had to sign and date monthly, a direct result of our advocacy. Some of the younger kids from the bus were still struggling with nightmares, waking up screaming about drowning or being trapped. Their parents would call asking for advice, and we'd connect them with trauma specialists who understood how to help children process near-death experiences. We learned that healing wasn't some straight line where you just got better, but something that came in waves, good days and bad days, and having support made those bad days bearable. The district launched an anonymous reporting app where students could report any safety concern directly to administrators and the board, bypassing the principal if needed. In just the first month, they caught 2 drivers who were showing signs of substance abuse, getting them into treatment programs before anyone got hurt. Jason's podcast episode, featuring all of us talking about that day and everything that came after, won a National Student Journalism Award. He called us all together to announce he was donating the $1,000 prize to Safe Seats, saying it felt wrong to profit from almost dying. That spring, I sat at my computer staring at the college application essay prompt about overcoming challenges, and my fingers started typing about pulling that emergency brake while water rose around us. I wrote about organizing with Harvey, about testifying at the state capitol, about turning the worst day of my life into something that could save other kids. I clicked submit on 12 applications, each with that same essay about how almost drowning taught me that systems only change when people force them to change. The acceptance letters started coming in March, thick envelopes from schools I never thought would look at someone from our small town. The one from State University had a handwritten note from the admissions officer saying, my essay made her whole committee tear up and that they needed more students who understood how to turn trauma into action. The scholarship offer covered everything, tuition and books and housing, all because I wrote about a drunk bus driver and the kids who refused to let it happen again. Harvey called that same week with news that made him cry on the phone. Brown had written him from a rehab facility 3 states away where he'd been living with his sister, 8 months sober now, and volunteering with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, telling his story at high schools about the day he almost killed 32 kids. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness, just said he wanted Harvey to know that losing everything had finally made him face what he'd become, and now he spent his days trying to keep other people from making his mistakes. Harvey forwarded me the letter, and I read it 3 times before putting it in the same drawer where I kept his first letter, still not ready to forgive, but somehow glad he was trying to fix himself. That summer, we got an email from the National Education Safety Conference asking if 5 of us would present our story as a case study for school administrators from across the country. They flew us to Chicago, where we stood in front of 800 people in suits and told them about disabled emergency exits and were ignored complaints and a principal who chose staffing numbers over student lives. I watched administrators scribbling notes when Sally explained how following the rules wasn't enough, when the adults breaking them had all the power, and Jason played audio from his podcast of the younger kids describing their nightmares. Bradley showed them the timeline we'd created. Every report ignored, every warning dismissed, every moment the system failed us before we almost died. The standing ovation lasted so long that the conference organizers had to ask people to sit down so we could finish, and afterwards, superintendents from Texas and California and New York approached us with business cards, asking for copies of our presentation to take back to their districts. My therapy sessions had shifted from twice a week to monthly by then, and Dr. Roberts said the nightmares were normal, that I'd probably always jump at sudden loud noises and check for exits wherever I went, but that hypervigilance could be channeled into something useful. She was right, because now I could walk into any building and immediately spot the safety violations, the blocked exits, the missing inspection stickers, the things that could kill people if everyone stayed quiet. Brown writing letters from rehab makes me curious about whether he's really changed or just trying to ease his guilt. People facing consequences often suddenly discover remorse they never showed before. I'd started carrying a notebook to document everything I saw, sending photos and reports to Safe Seats, turning my anxiety into evidence that could force changes. 2 years after that day in the flood, they invited all of us back for the dedication of the new District Transportation Center, a building designed with safety as the first priority instead of an afterthought. The plaque by the entrance had all 32 of our names and the date we almost died, with "Never Again" engraved below in letters you could see from the street. Harvey's hands shook as he cut the ribbon, and when he mentioned his son, who didn't get to grow up because of a preventable bus accident, I saw Brown's replacement driver wiping her eyes. The The new safety features were everywhere. Breathalyzer locks on every ignition, emergency exits that couldn't be disabled, cameras showing every angle, monthly drug tests posted publicly, everything we'd fought for made real in concrete and steel. A documentary filmmaker contacted me through Jason's podcast, wanting to tell our story for a film about student safety, but we told her we'd only participate if she focused on the systematic changes, not the drama of that day. She agreed, and we spent 3 days being interviewed about policy changes and safety protocols while she filmed the new procedures at districts that had adopted our standards. The film ended up being required viewing in transportation training programs in 14 states, and the filmmaker told us later that 3 drivers had turned themselves in for substance problems after watching it, getting help before they hurt anyone. Sally's valedictorian speech that June made everyone in the auditorium cry when she thanked our bus group for teaching her that sometimes breaking the rules was the only moral choice when the rules protected the wrong people. She got a full scholarship to study education policy and promised to spend her career making sure no kid ever had to pull an emergency brake to save their classmates again. I ran into Brown's ex-wife at the grocery store that summer, and she grabbed my arm gently, thanking me for saving her kid's father from becoming a killer, saying that hitting rock bottom had saved him too, even though their marriage couldn't survive it. The younger kids from the bus had started high school by then, and their parents sent me videos of them running for student council on safety platforms, organizing evacuation drills, immediately reporting anything suspicious instead of staying quiet. They'd learned at 6 and 7 years old that their voices mattered, that speaking up could save lives, that adults weren't always right just because they were adults. Bradley got into Harvard Law to study civil rights with a focus on student safety cases. Jason's podcast got picked up for national syndication, focusing on youth advocacy, and Sally headed to D.C. to work at the Department of Education, reforming transportation policies. 5 years passed, and Harvey called me one morning with news that made my hands shake. The state report showing drunk driving incidents on the school buses had dropped 78% since our fight started. I drove to his office that afternoon and found him standing at his desk, holding the printed statistics next to a framed photo of his son, and another one of all 32 of us from that day on the bus. He pointed at the numbers with tears running down his face, telling me these were lives saved that we'd never even know about. Kids who got home safe because we refused to stay quiet. My college graduation came 2 months later, and I walked out to the parking lot in my cap and gown to find the whole bus group waiting by Jason's van, all wearing those red student safety first shirts we'd designed years ago. They'd driven 3 hours to surprise me, and Bradley held up my diploma in public policy with a concentration in child welfare, while Sally took photos of everyone together. That scared kid who pulled the emergency brake would never have imagined standing here with a degree focused on protecting other kids. The mail brought an unexpected letter 3 weeks later with Brown's shaky handwriting on the envelope, and my stomach clenched as I opened it to find 3 pages explaining he was 5 years sober, had remarried, and now worked as an addiction counselor at a treatment center. He'd included a photo from a MAD event where he spoke to hundreds of people about the day he almost killed a busload of kids, his face showing the weight of what he'd nearly done. The letter ended with him saying he understood if I never wanted to respond, but needed me to know that hitting rock bottom that day had saved him from becoming a killer. Harvey's voice was shaking when he called that September to tell me the federal government was adopting our safety standards for every school district in America, meaning every single school bus would have breathalyzer locks, working emergency exits, and monthly inspections. We'd actually changed the entire system, turned our worst day into protection for millions of kids we'd never meet. The National Transportation Safety Board interview came 6 months later, and the panel kept asking about my experience and how it shaped my understanding of safety protocols. They offered me the position of their youngest policy analyst on the spot, with my first assignment being a complete review of school bus safety protocols nationwide. The interviewer shook my hand and said my lived experience made me uniquely qualified to spot the gaps that others might miss. 10 years after that day in the flood, Jason's wedding brought us all back together as his wedding party, and during his speech, he raised his glass to thank us for saving each other that day and every day since. We stood there in matching suits and dresses, survivors who'd become family, raising our glasses to survival, friendship, and forcing change that mattered. My new office at the safety board had a window overlooking the highway, and I kept that photo on my desk, the one showing our bus half submerged in muddy water with kids climbing out the windows. People sometimes asked why I'd want that reminder, but it wasn't trauma porn. It was proof that regular people, even scared kids, could stand up to broken systems and win. Every policy I wrote, every safety protocol I reviewed, every recommendation I made honored that moment when we chose to fight back instead of accepting that this was just how things were. Last week changed everything again when a teenager's voice came through the Safe Seats hotline, barely whispering that their driver seemed impaired and asking what they should do. Because of the systems we'd built, that driver was pulled from their route within an hour, tested positive for alcohol, and removed before anyone got hurt. The kid's mom called me afterward, crying as she thanked us for creating a way for her daughter to speak up safely, for building the structure that meant no child had to pull an emergency brake to save their classmates. That's the real victory, not the awards or the policies or the speeches, but the disasters that don't happen, the kids who get home safe, the drivers who get help before they hurt someone, all because 32 kids on a flooding bus refused to stay quiet about what almost killed us. Time to wrap up this commentary ride, folks. Appreciate you letting me share my wit and wisdom along the way. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.